Hello, everybody. David Shealy here, joining you with a very special guest. This is Clayton Schroeder. He wrote a book that honestly may be a shock title. It's called Loserville, which I know you're thinking the Braves just won the World Series. How does that even make sense? This book is not about Atlanta sports blowing leads and just being bad necessarily, but it's about how sports was brought into the city of Atlanta, trying to make Atlanta a major sports city, and the failures, the things that worked, the things that did not work, and also how that affected other cities. Clayton, thank you so much for joining us. And the first question I have is the inspiration to write Loserville. Where did that come from, and what encouraged you to continue to write this book? Because as we talked before, this was a book that you worked on all through your 30s.
Thanks, David, for having me on. This book started out when I was 30 years old. I was a graduate student. I'm a U.S. historian. My area of interest is American urban history, and I was looking for a topic for my doctoral dissertation. And initially, I had the idea of writing about the impact of pro sports franchise relocations on American cities. And I went to my advisor with this idea, and she said, "That'll take you 50 years to do. Pick a particular city that is emblematic of the trends you want to discuss." And there's no city that was that proved this more than Atlanta. Atlanta goes from having no major sports teams in the mid 1960s to by 1972 having teams in the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, and National Hockey League. The first Southern city to have teams in all of these leagues. So the story of how cities became major league can be told through the story of Atlanta.
The one thing I really enjoyed about this book that I just mentioned to you off camera is how this is the book for Atlanta sports fans to learn things that they did not know before. So you get into the Falcons, the Braves, the Hawks, but also the Atlanta Flames. People don't really talk about the Flames a lot. And one of the things that I found so interesting is you dissected the narrative that the Flames failed in Atlanta because they were bad. They weren't. The only two losing seasons they had were their first two seasons in Atlanta, and after that, they were winning. They were a winning team. There were other reasons why the Atlanta Flames did not work. But as you take a look at the back of this book, that it's hard to put everything on camera like that, but a lot of this is notes, bibliography, and more notes. How much research went into this project?
Well, this is something I started when I'm 30 and is going to be published when I'm 40. I essentially spent my 30s doing this. I went to numerous libraries, both in the Atlanta area, and then I went to college, to graduate school at Boston College, many schools in New England that had microfilm of different newspapers. I looked at a wide range of archives. I did about 50 interviews for this book. Researching it took about 4 or 5 years. Part of it was also simply getting to know Atlanta. I had no previous connection to Atlanta other than simply picking it as the topic for my dissertation, which I've eventually evolved into this book. So I spent several months in the city simply getting a sense of things, not only going to archives, but simply driving around the city and getting a sense of things, getting a feel for the place I'm talking about. To me, it was incredibly important to take seriously that this was someone else's home and that I needed to take a lot of effort into getting a clear sense of this place, both in the past as well as the present, before I was making pronouncements about the history of the city.
What kept you going throughout this process, and throughout the researching process, did anything surprise you along the way? I don't want you to necessarily give away too much content in your book because some of that might be in this book, but what surprised you? What were those experiences like? How'd you keep going?
In terms of keep going, just finding a place within my day, an hour and a half, 2 hours every day to work on it is how I did it, by creating very sizable, doable chunks each day in terms of work, whether it was the writing or the research stage is what kept me going. In terms of what was surprising, a lot of things about the politics and particulars of Atlanta I really had no idea about going in. But in terms of the teams, as you mentioned earlier, the Flames were a great surprise to me. As an outsider, I grew up in Vermont. I went to college in Massachusetts. The Flames to me, well, they were this short-lived expansion team in Atlanta that was around a long time ago. I didn't know much about them. The degree to which they drew well in their early years developed a particularly strong fan base among affluent North Siders, and the degree to which they succeeded on the ice, fielding a consistently successful team throughout their 8-year tenure in the city surprised me. I mean, there were little particular things about the Braves and the Falcons and the Hawks that also surprised me, but nothing so much as the story of the Flames, which I hope this book in many ways helps to, I guess, recover the tradition of the Flames, that this was actually a very successful franchise and one that ends up moving in large part because the owner, Tom Cousins, ran into some serious financial problems with his real estate empire. Not so much that he wanted to move the team, but it proved a financial imperative in the context for him. And the price was also right. There were investors in Canada who were willing to spend a great deal of money to get an NHL franchise by the very early 1980s.
I want to talk real quick about the Atlanta Falcons because people may see behind me that there are some Atlanta Falcons credentials there. And as a Falcons fan, I was very interested when I saw that you have a chapter titled How the Falcons Lost Atlanta. And I was so interested to learn some things about the Falcons that I did not know before. One of the sections that really surprised me, it's deep into the book. I mean, this chapter is deep into the book, but the spectacle of no-shows at Atlanta Stadium during the 1974 season was one of the few times that the national sports media paid attention to the Falcons. Otherwise, the team remained virtually invisible on the national stage. During the 1970s, the Falcons made the fewest appearances, 3, of any NFL team on ABC's Monday Night Football. In 1974, CBS made the fateful decision to feature the promising young Falcons team on 7 of its national broadcasts, offering the club more national appearances in one season than its previous 4 seasons combined. However, the 1974 Falcons were not good. That was a 3-win team. And then you detail how that team drew the league's lowest national television ratings, and it also endured their worst local television ratings in franchise history. I never knew that. And those are the type of details that are in this book that makes it so appealing to me as an Atlanta sports fan. And that's why I think this book is so tremendously written. It is thorough in its research. And honestly, as you're writing something throughout your 30s, I'm sure you're looking back and thinking, this is a lot of information that after basically years of research it's impactful. It's really, I don't know if that's hit you yet, but this book could really be something that changes the way people view sports in Atlanta forever.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I think simply it's a matter of when you take a long time to research something, you're able to build a great deal of details. I had huge folders of material on all of these teams. And eventually, over time, once you compile these things, some of these things become clearer. Like, for example, the 74 season, getting a sense of just how the national press misread this team, expected great things because Van Brocklin had put together a pretty solid team in 73, and that things turned very poor the next year. So simply taking the time to get that kind of material together, I think helps build a case for why things went as they did, in particular in that season. That was the most dramatic example of it. But the Falcons had struggled from really the time they got to town in 1966. They had an owner in Rankin Smith who had been a very successful insurance salesman, relied on a lot of close associates to play a prominent role in his organization. And as a result, the Falcons ended up struggling. They were competing with teams that had much more veteran staffs doing the actual football work. Things have certainly changed for the Falcons in recent decade. The Arthur Blank organization had a much more professional operation. But yeah, I think people underestimate how difficult it is to run a pro sports team. And in many ways, this is the story of this book. With the Flames and the Hawks, you have Tom Cousins, who's essentially a real estate investor. You have Rankin Smith, who's essentially an insurance man owning that team. With the Braves, you have a largely absentee ownership. So you have relatively inexperienced or distant ownership playing this prominent role in all of Atlanta's teams. And in part because of that, they struggle on the field, which exaggerates existing trends within the metro area, which ended up leading to a degree of local apathy towards these teams in the 60s and 70s.
For you, as you're writing this book, doing this research, was there any sense of sympathy for Atlanta sports fans, or maybe just these owners that tried so hard to get things to work. Maybe the politicians that were involved in this as well. I don't know how emotionally invested you got into looking at this research, but I'm curious as to that.
Yeah, I felt an emotional investment in all of these parties when you spend this much time with these people, whether it's Ivan Allen in the political leadership working to bring these teams in, whether it's the owners trying to, in many ways, they're trying to make a civic investment in these teams, bringing something in that will bring people together and also be a source of local pride. Obviously, they're trying to make money, but there's other ways to make money too if you're a big businessman. So there's a degree of making a civic investment in this. And certainly these owners did so. So I have a degree of empathy for them. And I certainly have empathy for the fans too, who wanted to, of course, see a winning team and were very excited, many of them, to have big league sports in town. So I guess my empathy spread broadly. But the way I look at it, this story ends up having a happy ending. Eventually, the Braves certainly figure it out. Since 1990, they've arguably been the model organization of Major League Baseball. Since the blank organization came in with the Falcons, it's been one of the best run organizations in the league. And in recent years, the Hawks have had a couple of very significant runs, despite a lot of hiccups in their organization. And you couldn't do better than Atlanta United did, basically out of the gate, drawing incredibly broad support for their team. Hockey's been up and down in its experience in Atlanta, but I hope to recapture the actual enthusiasm there was for the Flames in the 70s. So I see this despite the title, which is a reference to Louis Grizzard's columns in the 70s about Atlanta's struggles at the box office and in the standings. Despite the title and despite some of the struggles the teams faced in their early years, in the end, I think this book strikes a very positive note about Atlanta's sporting experience and the way that city leaders, fans in the city, and also team owners have learned from the experiences of earlier Atlanta pro sports franchises.
Yes, I do need to make sure people understand Loserville is not a book about trashing Atlanta teams for all the failures on the field and or court. It's not this. You're not going to open this book and it's not going to say, "Do you remember the Falcons blowing a 28-3 lead?" You're not going to open this book and say, "Do you remember when the Braves blew a 3-1 lead in the NLCS?" That the failures of these teams is part of this, but this Loserville is not just a trashing of Atlanta teams. I think that is definitely important. I really believe that this is, as I told you off camera, a well-researched, thorough analysis of major league teams in Atlanta. And I made the joke earlier, my English professors would have loved this piece because of how well it is researched and written and how many sources you used. And one last thing I really want to know is that how this connected to the other cities for you, because you talked about San Diego, you also talked about Tampa Bay briefly in this book, and connected their moves to make their cities hotbeds for professional sports. How did that play into this for you, and what did that entail in terms of research?
Well, thanks for the kind words about the book, first of all. Atlanta was the genuine pioneer for expansion cities. San Diego, Phoenix, Houston, Tampa, it doesn't matter where you look. They're following the Atlanta model of going out and promoting yourself, getting the attentions of the major sporting leagues, making public investments in stadiums. In the case of Atlanta, it was Atlanta Fulton County Stadium and the Omni Coliseum. Other cities have done the exact same thing as a way to become major league. Sometimes they face similar struggles to Atlanta. Atlanta obviously is a profoundly suburbanized place, a place with a lot of transplants from other parts of the country. These things have made it tough for these teams to develop durable support. And whether you were in San Diego or Phoenix or Tampa or Jacksonville or Charlotte or Nashville, in many ways they face the same things. It's not like a team in Boston or New York or Chicago where your dad took you, whose dad took you, whose dad took you. It's not this 5 generation kind of epic of fandom. You have a lot of people who come to Atlanta for a wide range of reasons and have either decided or not to support the local teams. So it's even though the teams have been there a few decades, Atlanta's relationship to sports are very different than these older cities in the Northeast and the Midwest. So I hope that's the note people take from this, that this is an origin story for the modern sports business, and Atlanta is front and central in inventing the modern sports industry.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Well, I'm going to give you a chance to plug your book. Tell us when it comes out, where we can find it, and anything else that you're working on in the future, possibly.
Great. My name is Clayton Truder. My book is called Loserville: How Professional Sports Remade Atlanta and How Atlanta Remade Professional Sports. It's being published by the University of Nebraska Press. It comes out February 1st. It's available for pre-order on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all the other well-known online book retailers. I'd love if people check me out on Twitter. My handle is @ClaytonTruder, all one word. I do a lot of freelance sports writing and for a range of magazines, and I'm currently working on my second book, which is about college basketball in Boston during the 1980s. And look forward to hearing from you and hope you guys check out the book. And if you do, I'd love to hear from you on social media. Love to be your friend on Facebook too.
Awesome. Awesome. Clayton, thank you so much. And you heard it here, Loserville, coming out February the 1st. All right, everybody. We'll catch you next time.